Welcome to Inflection Point Podcast, where we cultivate change from the inside out as we ponder the Cairo question. Will Cairo have to protest in his lifetime for the birthright to freely and peacefully exist in the skin in which he was born? We stand on the belief that dismantling racism goes beyond laws and legislation or politics and economics. Here, anti-racism activation is presented as an inside job where personal transformation and accountability impact social change. So take a seat at the anti-racism activation table with Inflection Point Podcast.
Well, hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the newest episode of Inflection Point Podcast. This is the spot where we are dedicated to the art of listening and authentic conversation. We challenge our audience to listen actively and intentionally for the purpose of self-awareness, understanding, personal transformation, and ultimately social impact. I am your host, Anita Russell, and here's a quick hello from co-hosts Mavis and Gail.
Hi, I'm Mavis Bauman.
Hi, I'm Gail Hunter, and welcome to this evening's program.
Excellent, excellent. So if you've been following us, you know that our theme for 2024 is community conversations, and we have an amazing guest in store for you this evening. So I'm going to start out with just a quick introduction to our guest. Her name is Khamil Bailey. She is a co-founder of Cocoapreneur, co-founder of Greenwood Pittsburgh, and the Greenwood Plan. She is a corporate consultant, speaker, and Black business advocate. I want to just tell you a little bit more about Khamil. Let me just find the rest of her bio. Khamil's vision of thriving Black communities was planted in her home city of East Orange, New Jersey, and then transplanted to the city of Pittsburgh, where she attended the University of Pittsburgh. And that evolution includes the Greenwood Plan, the Greenwood Week, Emerald City co-working space, and the cherry on top of all of that is the acquisition of a $4.1 million building in the city of Pittsburgh. So Khamil, welcome to our show. We are so ecstatic to have you here.
Thank you, Miss Anita. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your backstory? Because I just found out in our last conversation that you weren't originally from Pittsburgh. For some reason, I made that assumption. I think it just is related to the dedication that I see to you, to the city. And so if you could start off just telling us a little bit about your backstory, how you ended up in Pittsburgh.
Yep. So long story short, I came here because of attending the University of Pittsburgh, but I grew up in East Orange, New Jersey. And that's a town that is predominantly Black in all ways. The leadership in the city was and is still Black. My teachers, my doctors, entrepreneurs, people who lived well, people who did not live well, were all Black people. And this gave me a very holistic view of Black life and what Black people were capable of. And I think that really rooted and grounded me in my own identity in regard to Blackness. I came to Pittsburgh in 2005 to go to the University of Pittsburgh and was completely culture shocked when I got here because it is starkly different from East Orange. And I found that the relationship that the city had with its Black residents was really a very demeaning one from my perspective. And initially it made me really resent the city. Once I did start to plant some roots here, started a family here, I decided that if I was going to have a family here, that it needed to look a little differently, which really began a lot of the advocacy work that we currently know as Cocoapreneur and Greenwood Plan, Greenwood Week, Emerald City. It really started from this idea that the city just didn't look like what I felt it needed to look like for me to raise my family here and what I felt people deserve to have here.
Excellent, excellent. So can you share a little bit more about your experience at the University of Pittsburgh and how that gave you either insight or a lack of insight maybe into the surrounding communities here? Because I don't if our audience is familiar with the city of Pittsburgh, the university is like right in the middle of the Pittsburgh, and there are surrounding communities that happen to be Black communities. So if you could talk a little bit about what that experience was like. And also I'd just like to mention that I also went to the University of Pittsburgh, and Gail did as well. So the three of us have that in common.
Yeah, and the it's not just Pitt. Like, Pittsburgh is a college town.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the University of Pittsburgh, there's Carnegie Mellon University, Chatham University, Point Park University, Duquesne There's a bunch of colleges in the city of Pittsburgh, and they're all, maybe with the exception of a few, they don't really have closed campuses. So the campuses are a part of the city. You kind of naturally flow in and out of the campuses. And when I arrived at Pitt, there were a lot of warnings about the Black neighborhoods that were very close to the university. So it was like, be careful when you're going into the Hill District, or when we were riding certain bus lines that led to like East Liberty, it was kind of like, be careful going into East Liberty at night. But I realized that I didn't feel at home until I was in those places. So it was again, a situation where the city kind of treated its Black residents and its Black neighborhoods very negatively. And it also discouraged people who were visiting from going to those neighborhoods and experiencing what that was like. And this was in 2005 that I was told to be careful of the Hill District and East Liberty. But even recently, some people may remember in the past, I believe 4 or 5 years, that Carnegie Mellon put out a map to its students about the neighborhoods surrounding, and, all of the H neighborhoods were grayed out, right? So that's the Hill, that's Homewood, that's Hazelwood. These are all like predominantly Black neighborhoods. And they were all just kind of grayed out as if they did not exist on this map, which was alarming. And it raised a lot of flags and caused a whole lot of conversation about the way that our universities can cause harm in this city, especially when it comes to Black neighborhoods. So that was the experience that I had when I got here, was just, why do you all treat your Black folks like this?
Absolutely. Mavis, Gail, any comments or questions for Khamil?
I was just surprised. Gail, why don't you speak to it since you live there? But I'll go
Yeah,
after you.
As much as I've lived here most of my life, and I was born in Philly, but I still feel appalled when I hear that and experience it. But you're right. That's exactly right. When I was in college, now this was back in the 60s, 70s, I had to go to placements in the Hill, right? Now, nobody then was warning me to be careful. But later on, as the years went on, then people started doing, and it's just amazing. It shouldn't be that way, right? And it's just like redlining. When they were doing redlining back in the 30s and 40s, it's exactly the same thing. Except now the universities who have Black students there are telling the students, don't go here, don't go there. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And Khamil, they told all the students that, right?
All of us. It was a brochure that they handed out, at least for CMU, right? This was something that was available to their student body as a guide.
Right.
And it was university issued, here's a map of where to go. And very subtly where not to go, because we're not even going to list it on the map. But for Pitt, I think my experience was kind of word of mouth. Like, they had they called it arrival survival back then. And it was the first couple of days that you got to the university, you got these tours, and they gave you kind of like tidbits of information. And it was kind of word of mouth, like, from the tour guide, like, yes, just, you want to be careful when you go to the Hill District. But again, those were the places where I felt most at home. I felt the most hospitality when I went into the Hill District. I felt the most hospitality when I went to Homewood to a potluck, where people were breaking bread and sharing stories. But, culturally, there's just no appreciation for that when I got here.
So can you actually talk a little bit more about how you went about bridging that gap? So obviously when you got here, you see a gap between, messaging that the university is giving you, but when you interacted with the Black community, were there also gaps that you saw that when you compare your upbringing in East Orange, what were some of the differences that you saw specifically related to the Black communities, the Black people, and things of that nature?
Well, and I'll say this, I was stewarded into Black communities by Black people who wound up coming to the university, right? So there's a group called Sankofa that would meet periodically on campus. And it was a group that was there to help people find their community, right? Find their culture, even being away from home. And this is where I started to, get invited to Homewood to go to events and things like that. And I noticed that those people had a very strong sense of self, but generally speaking, outside of the circles, there was a huge disconnect between the history of Black Pittsburgh and where we were at that time. And if you know anything about Pittsburgh history, it does have a very rich Black history. Like when we think about the jazz scene in the Hill District, when we think about the National Opera House that's now being restored, there was a history for the arts for Black Pittsburgh that, resembled anything close to Chicago or New York today, right? It was like a hub for Black arts. And I think there was a disconnect between the history that existed for Black Pittsburgh and what people of Pittsburgh in 2005 were getting, right? So I think the difference between Pittsburgh and where I grew up is our history was always reiterated to us, right? Like our schools, my elementary school was renamed. It used to be called Lincoln Elementary after the president, and it was renamed to the Dionne Warwick Institute for Economics and Entrepreneurship. And it was like, we took it for granted at the time, but in actuality, they found all these ways to remind us of what we came from, right? Like that, just to remind us that we're always capable of great things. And I think that was a disconnect that I saw for Pittsburgh, is that Pittsburgh people have been disenfranchised for a long time. And the history that should be highlighted and bolstered was just left out for a lot of people.
And I think when we were talking, I had shared an experience. I often, when I talk about my time at the University of Pittsburgh, one of the most empowering classes that I ever took was a class called Black Consciousness. And it was, the instructor was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Curtis Porter. And to this day, I look at Dr. Curtis Porter as being the one professor that I had that really impacted me in a very profound way, right? And so I'm a lot older than Khamil. And so when I was at the university, I was entering the university when they were still on the heels of establishing the Black department, the Black Studies department, and all of that at the university. And we kind of ran into a little bit of a glitch because Curtis Porter was one of the founders of the Black History, Black Studies department, I should say, and kind of getting that implemented and everything. And there came a point where they initiated separation for him to leave the university because he didn't have a PhD in a particular discipline at that time. And so the Black students protested against that. But what was interesting is that because of the way Khamil described the University of Pittsburgh, it is right in the middle of the city. And there are surrounding communities, as an example, the Hill District. So when we were out there protesting on behalf of Dr. Porter, because he did eventually go back and get his PhD, the community was there with us. And so when I kind of think about that experience and then having grown up here in the city of Pittsburgh and, not in the least bit being fazed if someone tells me that the Hill District is dangerous or what have you. I grew up here. I know my community. But you are making a very, very good point when you talk about the general mindset, maybe, if you will, of Pittsburghers. It's a little bit different. And because I spent so much time not living in Pittsburgh, I was out of not living in Pittsburgh for close to 30 years, right? And I happen to live in the New Jersey, New York area. So when Khamil talks about East Orange, I know exactly what she's talking about, at least from that standpoint, not from the standpoint of growing up there, but from the standpoint of experiencing what is there. So any comments, Mavis, Gail?
I just find it interesting. I had never heard about a phenomenon like that, where Black students were, in essence, separated from the local community. I never received any information that way when I studied in Boston. No one ever talked about that. I mean, years later, I heard that there were some tough neighborhoods, but I just find it very isolationist, you know, to not be able to fully navigate the town and find your own way and your own friends. And yeah, did you find that your fellow white students, did they open up to those communities as well as you found your friends in the Black communities?
Absolutely not. There would be no reason.
No.
So, and I think this is what you said is like a very good point, right? There's a part of like white supremacy that allows for comfort, right? And you don't even have to think about that. That's just not even something you have to think about, right? It's not something you have to consider, which is a great comfort to have. But when you are a Black person, when you are any type of marginalized individual in a place where it is predominantly male, pale, and stale, you have to be hyper vigilant all the time, right? Like you have to know where your actual safety might come from. And I'm coming from a place that's very Black. When I came to, and my schools and everything, like I went to school with all Black kids, 98% Black kids. And when I came to Pitt, you know, again, I'm just a Black girl in a sea of everybody else. I needed to know where my safety was. Like, where am I safe?
Sure.
And that happened with Black communities, with Black people, because those were the people I was most familiar with. Culturally, sure. I know we share a certain type of language. We share certain social cues. We share certain hygienic cues, right? Like there's just things that we share that made it easier for me to communicate and made it easier for me to express when I was not safe. That's something that I think people don't always realize is when you are a Black person attending a predominantly white university, your first thought is, where am I safe? Like where, you know, if I have to run for cover, where do I run to? But that's just something that I think we have to think about, that white people attending a predominantly white university don't have to consider at all.
No,
not at all.
I never had to think about that.
Yeah, so maybe you could talk a little bit about the experience that you had, because you were at the University of Nebraska, just as a contrasting.
Right, pretty contrasting. I mentioned that I had grown up in Western Nebraska. And so the first time I was really around people of color was in Omaha. And I was, you know, just very interested in social issues. And I signed up for a Black Studies class. And I was pretty green going in there. And I remember saying something, probably ignorant, but a young lady, just, you know, a young Black woman stood up and just kind of started shouting at me. And I didn't know what was going on. I've told this story before on the podcast, but I want to tell Khamil. And I said, what did I say? What did I do? And she goes, no, you're interested, you know, something to that effect. You care. And there was so much energy in her body, which was a different way of communicating than I had ever experienced, right? So I just became fascinated by all that. How much are we not understanding each other? Because in the white culture, I would have thought that she was really, really upset with me. She was just excited. Right. And so that pulled me in more to the Black culture, as opposed to what sounds like happened with the white people that you, I don't know how close you became to, had white friends there at Pitt, but they never wanted to come with you to your friend's house in the Black neighborhood? Is that kind of how it rolled?
I did not have very many white friends.
Okay.
So that's one thing. I will also say I probably would not have invited them to someone else's home or event without some serious conversations first.
Oh, sure.
Because what happens is when there is a cultural distinction between two people, there could be a very quick escalation if there's just a miscommunication. So I don't want to bring that into anybody's home before we have like an initial conversation and introduction and all those things. That's just not something that I think is, I don't think it's respectful, right? I don't think it's respectful of the other person's house. Again, it's almost a matter of safety. You got to understand, historically, when you let white people into your stuff, they, even in all good intentions, being excited, wanting to share it with other people, it tends to let various folks in too. Yeah, historically, Black people have not had the luxury of just kind of sharing openly and being safe at the same time. It's a lot of things to navigate.
Do you think that person felt safe for a moment to speak to me that way? Or, I mean, that's hard to guess.
Yeah,
but...
if she expressed herself like that, I would say she felt safe.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would say that
she code switched or kind of tried to dim it down. But the fact that she let her whole self out, I think she felt safe.
And I would also say the fact that you were actually in a Black environment where she already felt safe.
Right.
That's true. There was only one other white student in the room.
She already felt safe, because part of what Khamil is saying, I can honestly say when I was at the University of Pittsburgh, I didn't have any white friends either. I had a couple of white friends, and I say friends like that, that they were like maybe somebody I would study with because we had a class together or something like that. But from a social perspective, everything that I did was related to the Black students. We had the Black Student Union, we had the Black fraternities, we had the Black sororities. We did all of that because what Khamil is speaking to, that divide was very much there when I was at Pitt. And so you just naturally, to her point, you gravitate into those spaces and being around those people and those individuals where you are going to feel safe.
Right. That was our common thread. Like that was the thing that we had in common, was our Blackness. And I really, like, I had classmates who were not Black who I talked to, especially about class, but like forming like bonds, it just didn't happen. Didn't happen. And it did. I mean, I'm not even upset about it. Like I didn't feel like people were not talking to me intentionally. You know, it's just a thing that kind of naturally happened.
Yeah. So
it was two different campuses. Like there's a Black Pitt community. We had Black Pitt events. It was like Black homecoming was different from regular homecoming. It was just a different thing.
Yeah.
So it was more than environmental. It was a natural gravitation. It was
societal. It was like the culture and the society on campus was just, it was a microcosm of our country. Like it's, you know, just how that was.
Exactly. So for example, I mentioned we had sororities and fraternities. None of the Black sororities or fraternities had a fraternity house or a sorority house. So whenever I hear the term like fraternity row or sorority row, I know that it never applies to us because we don't have that. Unless you're at a Black university, at HBCU, you just don't have that.
Right. We got apartments and all live together, but that's different. It's
right. Exactly.
But yeah.
Well, I appreciate your being so open about that. Those are the things I just want to learn. I want to know what it's like and how we grow up continuing to think differently, you know, and not really understanding each other, I guess is, you know, our experience is always going to make us have different perspectives, but to understand each other is just important.
But that's the challenge.
Yeah, it's to
Where
take
we are
time.
today, that is the challenge. That's the reason why we do this podcast, because it really is possible.
Mhm.
It really is possible, right? But it also takes a lot of work, a lot of energy, a lot of commitment, and a lot of critical self-reflection. I talk about this all the time. It's about you understanding who you are within the context of your whiteness, right? Because a big challenge for our white counterparts is just being able to decentralize the whole idea of whiteness, right? And to be able to remove that and then step into my perspective. I call that perspective taking. I mean, it's not like some term I made up. That's like a real thing. When you have the capacity to be able to put yourself aside and step into, it's even more powerful than just saying stepping into the shoes. It's literally stepping into the perspective of another individual, someone who is very, very different from you. But that desire to do that has to come from you, because I'm not necessarily going to seek that out. When I was at the University of Pittsburgh, that wasn't something that I naturally gravitated. I naturally gravitated towards those individuals who simply accepted me and who I am at face value. I didn't have to prove anything. I didn't have to say yay, or I didn't have to do anything. I was just socially accepted. And so there's a huge challenge to kind of move into a different space. But I would say that the challenge is not with Black people. The challenge is really in the hearts of white folks. So we have like 1 minute and we're getting ready to take our midpoint break. And when we come back, Khamil, I'd like to shift the conversation so we can talk about the work that you're currently doing and talk about this building. And I'm so happy to be a part of that space and all of that. So I really want to dig into your story and how it evolved into the person and the woman and what you offer to the Black community in Pittsburgh today.
Okay. Yep.
So welcome back to Inflection Point Podcast and our continuing community conversations for 2024. We are blessed to have as our guest, Khamil Bailey. So Khamil, I want to thank you so much for everything that you shared with us so far. And I'd like to change the direction of the conversation just a little bit and talk about where you are today, some of the phenomenal work that you're doing today. I want to hear that story now.
Yeah, so I think we kind of started with my Pittsburgh life beginning in 2005. And fast forward 10 years after experiencing various things in the city, also some social things happening out in the world that did impact campus life, thinking about Jena 6 and some of the other protests, like the major things that happened. My social awareness really opened up. And in 2015, I started a campaign with a local activist named Nazura Asasayaderu, and we started this Black Dollars Matter campaign. And it was taking just a stamp, like a rubber stamp that had $B$M, and stamping dollar bills for people, and that was like a visual representation for folks that this is money to be spent in the Black community. And this was at a time, unlike, George Floyd and Post, where a lot of our big box stores and corporations were not speaking out about Black people being killed by police violence. And this was our way of saying, hey, if folks are not going to speak out about injustices that happen to you, withdraw your money and your funding from them. And that led us to start this Black Dollars Matter campaign to say that, all the money that Black people spend in this country, if you redirect it out of these organizations that do not support you, they're going to feel the impact of that. Part of the trouble with that was if I was asking people not to spend money at some of these big box stores, I had to give them where they could spend their money. Which led to creating Cocoapreneur, which is the Black business directory for the city of Pittsburgh and outside. And that was kind of the beginning of it for me. People started to reach out to me about Cocoapreneur and the directory work, that's where people started to know more of my name and kind of not take seriously what I did, but approach me seriously about the advocacy work. And this is how I kind of came to meet Samantha Black. So when I met Sam Black, she and I clicked immediately around Black business, starting Black businesses and growing Black businesses. And that led us to create what's now called Greenwood Week. And Greenwood Week is a Black business conference that specifically caters to the needs of our Black entrepreneurs, right? Understanding socially and historically the context of Black entrepreneurship. How do we put people who look like these entrepreneurs in front of them, who are subject matter experts, to teach them about the basics? Putting people in front of them who they can be more receptive to, because again, there's not that same barrier in communication that can sometimes exist. Greenwood Week was the thing that came from that. And we realized in just year one doing Greenwood Week that people were really thirsty for that type of connection. People came out, it sold out almost every class, filled up the rooms, brought entire families, like mother, father, nursing children, whole nine. It was a very beautiful experience. We decided to keep doing that. And what we realized is that, one, we needed more money, and we needed a proper format to do that. So we took Greenwood Week and expanded it into Greenwood Plan, which became the nonprofit. So the nonprofit grew out of what we saw as really prayers answered through Greenwood Week. And then Greenwood Plan really started to progress quickly and organically. We were invited to be members of a co-working space. This is where Miss Anita also had her space. And when we were invited to be members, we got an office. This was right in the middle of COVID. I think this was 2020. And we kind of took a little bit of ownership in the space. We would make coffee every day. The folks who did own the space would ask us, to accept packages or give people tours or let so-and-so in. They gave us the keys to the entire building at one point, and it was just like we were really taking ownership of the building, but we didn't really own it. So the thought was just, well, if we're doing it anyway, maybe we should just own the building. And that's kind of what we decided to do, was pursue ownership of the building. That was in early 2021 that we made that decision. So we became members in 2020. By February of 2021, we kind of had this idea that we should, I might be mixing these years up, but it happened quickly is the point. And for 2 years, we fought long and hard to get a price on the building that we thought was fair and reasonable, to find a way to fund the purchase of the building, speaking to various foundations and lending institutions, different resource providers. And it really was an all-in type of effort once people knew what it was that we wanted to do. Considering the fact that those same social woes that existed in 2005 kind of still existed in 2021. The economic development community, the local political community, all were very hungry for something that enriched Black culture in our city. So there were a lot of people who supported what we were doing. So that's kind of the quick and dirty for all the things. Cocoapreneur was kind of like my introduction into entrepreneurship and advocacy. And that led me to meet up with Sam, and she and I created Greenwood Week, which grew into Greenwood Plan, which birthed Emerald City in this physical manifestation of what it is that we wanted to do. And that ultimately led to us acquiring the building with the ultimate goal of giving Black people more autonomy in entrepreneurship and career development, professional development, allowing us to fail forward, right? Allowing us to get training wheels as we build up our businesses, which is not something that we historically have had the privilege of doing. So, just making entrepreneurship a lot more feasible and just enjoyable for people.
So just to share how I got connected to the space. Khamil mentioned that the previous owners, I originally had office space under them because when I first started thinking about the idea of having office space, I kind of just shopped around downtown because I knew I wanted to be downtown. So I shopped around downtown and I found a spot over on Liberty Avenue near in the theater district, kind of over in that area. But one of the problems with that space was that it was much more of a smaller space and very open. And it was very problematic for me because there was always lots of noise and lots of talking and lots of chatter and all of that. And so the space itself wasn't really conducive to meet my needs, right? And so then I just sort of started shopping around and found this thing called the beauty shop, right? And I'm looking at it, and at first I'm thinking like it's a hair salon. And then I started reading and I'm looking at the pictures and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is office space. And so I decided that I would go over there. And the minute I stepped off the elevator, I knew that was a space that I needed to be in, because the biggest difference that I saw was that it was quiet.
Yeah.
So that was very, very helpful for me. And then, I was there for a while under the previous owners. And then 2020 came. Eventually, I held on to it as long as I could. And then I ended up letting it go. And then I'd say like around 2022 or so is when I decided that I needed to. But at the time, I did not know that it had changed hands at all. And so I'm just coming in to check out my previous office space. And the first thing I noticed, as soon as the elevators open up, if you see my background, this background actually is what I was walking into, which was a completely transformative space than what I had experienced originally. And as soon as I walked in, I was like, okay, whoa, this is something completely different. And it appealed to me. And so here I am. And so it took me a while, just kind of, because I'm not there every day and, just different things like that. And I got family in and out and things like that. But eventually I started to really connect. And then I met Khamil. It's like, oh, you're the person that's kind of responsible for this space being here. And I met Samantha and I found out that my cousin Alexis had space. So it just started to really, really grow from there. And now my grandson comes with me into that space and he feels so at home. And that is one of the things that I really love about that space, is that our children can be in that space and they can see us working, doing our businesses, being entrepreneurs, networking and talking and things of that nature. So Cairo is having a very different experience because of that space. So it isn't even just about our generation and it's what we're also feeding into our younger generation as well.
Yeah. Yeah, we find it typically when you think about business, right? Business tends to be very pretentious. Everybody's lying, right? Everybody is, doing the biggest, best, greatest everything. And it tends to be a very toxic environment. But what we found with what we created is that we completely pulled in elements of Black culture, which it includes this village mindset, right? It includes multi-generational connection and in a very reciprocal way. It's not just that your elders have something to teach you, but the youth have something to teach and share with the elders too. And the way that we allow this very organic transfer of information and energy to happen feels right. And it's hard to describe a lot of the time, but when we talk about Cairo being there and being able to interact with, people who are architects or who manage venture capital funds or people who, sell art pieces for $30,000. It's like you get to show your kids very early on, again, this image that they can see in themselves that shows them that they are capable of great things. And I think people take for granted how important it is to see people or images that you can identify with doing great things, because it shows you, like, it normalizes it completely, right? I'm not an anomaly. Like, I'm not an exception to the rule. For so long, people treated me as if I was an exception, and I'm not an exception. Like, I'm one of several. I'm one of thousands, hundreds of thousands of bright minds, innovative thinkers. Like, that is a normal thing. And Emerald City is a place where we want people to come in and immediately just let those thoughts fester, right? I think a lot of the time people are told to be realistic, right? When in their dreaming, in their thoughts, and what they pursue for careers. How many times have we heard that artists, you can't make a living off of art? That's just not something we subscribe to at Emerald City. It's like, what are you dreaming about? What keeps you up at night? Bring it here and let us pour into it. Let us help you tease that out. And we found a very organic and emotional response to that. One that I didn't anticipate, but I come to value all the time. When people get emotional about Emerald City and how they feel in Emerald City, that is probably the ultimate marker of success for us, right? This idea that people feel safe in Emerald City is something that we hold a lot of pride in.
Absolutely. I can definitely attest to that. So I want to put the conversation in a slightly different, though related pathway. We have been talking about the Kwanzaa principles, right? We had spent some time literally doing show after show where we really dug deeply into the Kwanzaa principles. And it was based on the idea and the belief that these are principles that we need to be doing every day, that I don't see them as things that are just kind of confined, like we talk about it in between Christmas and New Year's, and we have these celebrations and everything. And so it's become very, very important to me that I look at individuals who are actually living those principles on a daily basis. So Khamil, which one of the Kwanzaa principles resonates most with you personally and in your work? And why is that particular principle so important to you?
So I'm glad you said you separated the two, because professionally, all day is cooperative economics. Mine is always, it's going to be Ujima for professionalism for me. Cocoapreneur's logo has the Ujima symbol as the base of the tree. So that's one of those things where I just, it professionally, organizationally, it's always going to be cooperative economics, right? Personally, I want to say Nia. I want to say Nia because I feel like purpose-driven life helps all of us feel more secure in ourselves and then allows us to be whole people with others, right? So it's like this idea that when you know yourself, you can show up better for other people too, right? So you can be in community better with other people when you know yourself. And everything has nuance, right? I'm all for the cooperative aspect of everything, but I think it's so important for people to know themselves, know what it is that makes you go, know what it is that makes you happy, makes you sad, lights you up. Because again, I think that allows you to be in community with other people in a responsible way, right? You can then give your gifts wholly because you know exactly what they are. The community can use you better because you know what it is that you're giving. So I would say maybe those two are the two for me. They're all so good though.
Yeah.
They're all so good. It's really hard to pick a favorite. I say professionally, it's very easy with Ujima, but personally, that one's a tough one. I might just say Nia though.
So what is that call to action that you would have our audience to kind of respond to?
Yeah, so I would definitely say to visit the Greenwood Plan website. We have very grandiose plans for not just this building, but this ideally is the first of many physical edifices that we have to represent what we're doing. This can be the landmark, but ideally we create this type of activation for areas all over Western Pennsylvania that need it, because there are plenty.
Yeah.
If you have rich friends, send them my way. I have great things that I can do with their money. Because we have the 501c3 and our mission is very clearly stated, there are some very creative things that we can do with money that allow for us to really catapult, no pun intended, right? I have my catapult shirt on. We can, we can catapult really far when we have money. And money is important to this work. Like, part of the restorative part of what we do is money, right? Like,
always, yeah.
it's just a big part of it. It's a big part of the entire mission. It's almost reparations, right? It's a way for
Yes,
that's what it's like, redistributing
Right.
wealth and making it more equitable, making things more fair, truly fair. But we really could use that money. I don't know, and I'll give you an example of how we use money. The building itself, right? We finalized the sale price at specifically $4,075,000. Of that, $2 million of it we were able to put down in cash because we received $1 million from a private donor who had a trust fund. It was a great tax incentive for her as well. And then we had foundation funds that we were able to place on it, which means that when we buy the building, we buy in at 50% equity. That means that we can also pull from that equity for improvements on the building. That means that we're closer to paying the building off and having full ownership of it without the threat of losing the ownership because of default, right? The mortgage payments are affordable for us because we were able to put so much money into it. But those are the types of ways that we use money, right? That means that if our mortgage is low, the tenant rents are also low. Again, this gives our business owners the ability to step into these spaces without paying what they would normally pay market rate rent for downtown commercial real estate. That makes all the difference in the world. Giving people, reducing their expenses so that they can focus on the business. Again, failing forward, because most of us are first generation entrepreneurs, maybe second generation, but we're really figuring a lot of this stuff out. And to have that type of cushion is what's going to set us apart from, doing business like everybody else.
Okay. So if somebody out there is watching this show or listening to this show and they happen to be somebody who has some money, how would they get, and like, what would they do if they wanted to contribute, make a donation, help with the vision? Where would be the place that they would go to? Would that be the Greenwood Plan?
Yep, you can go to the Greenwood Plan website, or you can just email me directly.
Okay.
My email address is Khamil@greenwoodplan.com. So that's KHAMIL at greenwoodplan.com. And that's phonetic. But, if you reach out to me and let me know that you want to support in any way, we will always convene some time to talk. If you're local to Pittsburgh, we would love for you to come by and see the building. We love hosting people. But that's the best way to do it, is just to reach out, and then we'll figure out the best way to, use the gifts that you're sharing.
Do you do ongoing crowdsourcing as well?
I mean, we always have a donate link on our website, so that's always there. Yeah, you can always just kind of do it that way. There are some campaigns that we're working on to make it easier for people to regularly donate. So that might be a monthly donation that folks can subscribe to, just so they can always donate. That's something we've explored. We've also explored a membership model where not only do you donate financially, but you kind of stay abreast to what it is that we're doing. Whenever we are looking to either implement new programs, or if we're advocating for something either at the state or the federal level, we will reach out to our members for feedback about what it is we should advocate for and what we should ask for, right? So we're really exploring ways to not only collect people's money, but make them feel included in how we are growing together.
I really like the way you framed this up in terms of it being a form of reparations. I just really like that idea. But we literally are just almost completely.
No.
I know. We were just about out of town. So I want to leave our audience with this quote. I found like a number of quotes from you from various articles, but I really like this particular one. I know that back in the early 1900s, there were Black businesses that operated downtown, and this is referring to downtown Pittsburgh. We want to bring that back. Remind people that we, African Americans, are a part of a thriving economy just as anybody else, not just as consumers, but as wealth builders as well. And when I look at the work that you are doing, you are literally putting those words into action. And I applaud you. I support you. I just love what you're doing. It's a blessing to me to be a part of what is happening. And I'm hoping that my role will continue to grow and all of that. But we are just about out of time. Is there one last thing you want to leave us with, Khamil, before I officially close us out?
One thing that I've found myself saying a lot to people is that a rising tide lifts all boats. And it's not just about Black folks. This is about just making some societal change. And when Black people do well, when Indigenous people do well, everybody automatically does better too. So, yeah.
Amen. Thank you. So I want to thank you for joining us on Inflection Point Podcast here on Transformation Talk Radio. We are here every first and third Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific time and 6 p.m. Eastern time. We are excited to see you. When you come, you get immersed in our content, and we will see you the next time on Inflection Point Podcast. Thank you for listening to Inflection Point Podcast, where our mantra is cultivating change from the inside out. The journey towards anti-racism and social change doesn't stop here. Truth, reconciliation, and healing come from ongoing, open, honest, and deliberate conversations. Continue to dive in and deconstruct your thoughts, ideas, and beliefs as we band together to manifest social change. Tune in to Inflection Point Podcast every first and third Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, here on TransformationTalkRadio.com for more conversations about how we can cultivate change from the inside out.